Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do George Washington presidency, and there will be some questions on a Google form on your Moodle site that you will use to answer questions from this video. George Washington was President of the United States from 1789 to 1797. There is no political party that he was affiliated because there were no political parties at the time. His vice president was John Adams. And under his administration, one of the first things that he had to deal with was the debt from the American Revolution and the debt that still had occurred from the Articles of Confederation. So his first Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, came up with a financial program called Hamilton's Financial Program, and it had several parts. Part number 1, fund full payment of foreign and national debt. Sell U.S. bonds to investors. In order to raise money, the idea was that you created or you sold what we call bonds. Second, assumption of state debt. The state and national debt combined to be paid off. In other words, sometimes if you combine your bills, you can get a lower interest rate. And so that is Hamilton's that's his idea. Alexander Hamilton was a financial genius. And really knew how to get the country back on track financially. Number 3, the third part of his financial program was to tax whiskey. This was a luxury item. It will cause problems later on, but he felt like if we could tax whiskey, then the federal government could raise money. Federal government gained money by taxing luxury items. As they do today. Oftentimes we will tax something like cigarettes or something that we feel that is not necessarily needed. It's a luxury item. And then number 4th part of Hamilton's plan is a federally chartered Bank of the United States. So in other words, we're going to create a Bank of the United States in order for the federal government to sort of control the money, gain interest, and pay off our financial burdens. That was Hamilton's financial plan. Okay, moving on. Speaking of political parties, during the time there were political parties, Washington administration. Well, that doesn't mean that political parties weren't starting to form, especially after George Washington had left, but it started well before he had left. Next thing we're going to talk about is strict and loose interpretation of the Constitution. There are many ways to interpret the Constitution, and these interpretations become the political parties. One way to interpret the Constitution is strict interpretation. Government only has the powers that the Constitution specifically gives it. This was Jefferson's thinking, that you can only do what the Constitution says. The Constitution was our guideline, and if it didn't say it in the Constitution, then you did not have that power. That was a very strict interpretation. The other one is a loose interpretation. Government can do anything the Constitution does not say it cannot do. In other words, using the elastic clause. If it doesn't say I can't, then I can. Or in other words, reading between the lines. That is a loose interpretation. That was Alexander Hamilton's interpretation. Jefferson was a strict interpretationist, and Alexander Hamilton was a loose interpretationist. And where this comes to play, and by the way, Hamilton is Secretary of Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson is Secretary of State under George Washington's administration, the biggest issue that comes, and the two of them start to really fight it out, has to do with the establishment of the Bank of the United States in 1791. The Constitution doesn't say that you can have a Bank of the United States, so you have to take a loose interpretation of the Constitution. Jefferson will hate the bank because it goes against the Constitution, and Alexander Hamilton will, of course, that is part of his financial plan, to have a Bank of the United States in order to help raise money to pay off our national debt. He will take a loose interpretation of the Constitution. This bank would help create money to pay off our debt, as I said before, and it encouraged capitalism. Hamilton is going to be huge into capitalism. This idea, and it's the same idea that we have today, is that you've got many different companies, and those companies are working for a profit. And if you have multiple companies, that drives the prices down. If you only have one company making a certain product, then that creates a monopoly. Capitalism encourages competition. In other words, to bring prices down. Okay, and then as I said before, we'll just kind of go over capitalism. Most businesses are privately owned and operated. Competition in the free market primarily determine what will be produced and what price it will sell.